and recording sexually degrading acts and uploading images to private Facebook pages. And at the time, the Principals Association's Patrick Walsh was dismayed that they escaped criminal charges. Is there anything in here, Chris Gellerman, that interests you? The IPCA notes that information reported by media was not supported by fact.
Yeah. I've given the police and the Solicitor General a torrid time over the last year about a whole lot of cases where I don't think a prosecution should have been brought. The woman who left her child in the car and it died of heat exposure was one of those that I said that the exercise of discretion should have been exercised in her favour. She was charged with manslaughter and was actually just discharged without conviction. There's been a number of different cases where I've said they should have exercised the discretion. One, there should be a discretion, and it's important for the police to be able to exercise it on the basis of principle. Two is that the media play a role here in actually bringing a much more sophisticated and nuanced story, as much as they are limited by not having necessarily all the facts, because a lot of these things are still under investigation, of course, but the sensationalised headlines, of which everybody with a heart, with a soul, with an interest over young people and also victims of sexual offending would have been aghast when they saw what happened with this Roastbusters 2. But I think that there needs to be inquiries such as it's just been held by Judge David Carruthers, and I am heartened by the fact that the judges said no. They went through a robust system and a robust analysis, and they decided that it wasn't in the interest of justice. And there was evidential issues as well, because that test has two components. One is it has to meet an evidential threshold. Is there enough evidence that you could possibly get a conviction? And two, is it in the interest of justice for a prosecution to be brought? Yeah. So, people like me and the public should quite rightly hold the police to account for the exercise of discretion. Can't be arbitrary, should be on basis of principle. But two, I'd die in the ditch over the police having that discretion. It's a really important one. And here, I'm heartened by the fact that I think on close scrutiny of an independent an analysis, we can actually say, look, on the face of it, with the headlines, it might have looked like this was the wrong decision, but we should rest assured and have faith in the investigation that the right decision was made.
All right.
But also, finally, a lot of people think that justice is going to come through the criminal justice system, and actually, in many circumstances, it's the criminal justice system is an incredibly blunt tool for bringing justice, and there could be all sorts of other nuanced approaches apart from police prosecution that are the better way of dealing with things. But always at the bottom of the line, serious offending should result in serious consequences, aka investigation and prosecution.
Professor Chris Gellerman, thank you for being on the panel today. A couple of things, if we have time, before we go. Many people, one of them quite trivial, but many people will have seen across the online newspapers, in many parts of the world actually, an image of a duck fused with the image of a rabbit.
Or a rabbit with a duck.
And the ability to rapidly comprehend that there are two animals, as you have done, in that picture.
Yes, well done you.
Is said to denote high intelligence or enhanced creativity. Surely everyone sees a duck and a rabbit.
Oh, I thought so. I saw the rabbit first.
Did you? And
yeah.
But how?
Did you see the rabbit first?
Yeah, rabbit first.
Did you notice that Vladimir Putin and that? Surely everyone sees them swiftly.
Yes.
It didn't take you 5 minutes to find.
No, it did not. No. I saw the duck momentarily later, but I did see the rabbit first.
All right, thank you. I would ask you, Sue, but I know what the answer will be. You saw them instantaneously, both of them.
Well, I thought one of them was a chicken.
Tenders have closed to buy Awaroa Beach. And how many firm offers the 100 potential buyers talked about by the real estate turned into is not known. Gareth Morgan now claims he manipulated the Able Tasman Buy the Beach campaign to help push up donations. I needed a mechanism, he said, whereby the crowd would keep donating.
Whatever.
A double bluff.
Yeah, Gareth, you looked silly, mate. Didn't work.
It was a pretty sophisticated mechanism.
I don't think he looked silly.
He did. He looked silly. It's like, hang on, I'll buy the beach for my family. Oh, hang on, no, I won't buy the beach for my...
You cynic.
Oh, come on.
He only wanted a little part of it for his family.
It would scare off some of the other bidders. That might have been clever.
I'm going to go to that beach and I'm taking my cat.
Sue Wells, thank you for being on the panel today.
My pleasure.
Tim Watkin, thank you for being on the panel too.
Cheers.
Thanks, everybody. We are back tomorrow, and coming up, Checkpoint with John Campbell.
Kia ora everyone, welcome to Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm John Campbell, and on behalf of the team, thank you for joining us. Tonight, the Children's Commissioner on the conditions our poorest children are living in. What happened after a stabbing in Mangere, the street and the police, with two strikingly different versions of events, were in Christchurch, where some lives have been put on hold for 5 years now, and others are using a high-pressure hose to move on. We ask an earthquake scientist what is really happening beneath the ground there. We're at the Grammys, and to assess them, one of modern music's great critics joins us live. And are the Weeks triplets finally going to get justice from Qatar? All of that and more over the next 89 minutes. But first, here's Katrina Batten in an RNZ t-shirt with RNZ News.
A father says he's shocked his 6-year-old son was pepper sprayed during a large brawl between police and neighbours on a South Auckland street. Residents say up to 20 police officers were called to Lavinia Crescent in Mangere just after 10 o'clock on Sunday morning after a stabbing was reported. Footage has been put on social media showing the fighting and the 6-year-old who'd been riding his bike near the chaos walking away rubbing his eyes. His father, who's asked not to be named, says it wasn't until his son came running to him rubbing his eyes that he realised he'd been caught in the crossfire.
My 6-year-old, he was fine after that. It was like 10 minutes, washed it out, and then took him up to A&E there, because it wasn't only him, it was like my pregnant daughter was pregnant, because they were out here when that happened, because it happened so fast, they were out here to get them away from it. It was too late. It was too late, the damage had been done.
The father says he had to take his 17-year-old daughter to hospital because of burns to her face from the spray. The police say the use of pepper spray was a safe and legitimate option and was used to keep its officers safe. The county's Manukau West Area Commander, Jason Hewitt, says police were met with hostility when they arrived and were attacked when they tried to make an arrest. He says pepper spray was used to keep people safe and says officers did not aim at the 6-year-old boy. He says sometimes people can be caught in the crossfire. New figures shows loans and the potential wages lost while studying negate 60% of the extra earnings associated with tertiary qualifications. Analysis by Universities New Zealand shows graduates earn as much as $4 million more than non-graduates over their working lives, but the net benefit is much lower. Our education correspondent John Gerritsen reports.
The figures show graduates with a bachelor's degree working full-time earn an average of $1.4 million more than people with no tertiary qualifications over their working lives. But after accounting for student loans and the time spent studying rather than working, that margin falls to $552,000. For some qualifications, the equation results in a negative return, with graduates of complementary therapy degrees and some education certificates more than $75,000 worse off than non-graduates. This is John Gerritsen.
130 meat workers in Southland are waiting for news about their jobs after being sent home suddenly a week ago. The Meat Workers Union says managers at the Prime Range Meats factory in Invercargill told the workers unexpectedly last Tuesday they were being suspended. The company was taken over by a Chinese company, Linhua Trading Group, 15 months ago, with promises to expand the business and create jobs. The union's Otago Southland secretary, Gary Davis, says the factory's entire workforce was sent home with no notice, no pay and no indication of when they'll go back, and many are in financial trouble. Mr Davis says the problem seems to stem from some of the company's Chinese investors being caught up in turmoil on the Chinese stock market and funding problems over the Chinese New Year. The company would not comment on the situation today. The police have described the death of a West Coast teenager after a drinking spree as another tragic waste of a young life. 17-year-old Mitchell Hewitt of Hokitika died shortly after St John's paramedics were called to assist him and another who'd been drinking at a party at Lake Kaniere on Saturday. Detective Senior Sergeant Kevin Tiernan of the Greymouth CIB says Mitchell's family had told police he was an inexperienced drinker and they were unaware he drank at all. Mr Tiernan says the tragedy reinforced the police message of the dangers of drinking to excess. He says the alcohol was brought legitimately, but the police are still some way off establishing whether charges are appropriate. It's an offence to supply alcohol to people under 18. Auckland Council says people are at very low risk if they use public spa pools in the region after Legionella bacteria was detected in 2 facilities. The council has closed spa pools at the Tepid Baths on the city's waterfront and at Manurewa after the bacteria was found on separate occasions. The council says because it's the second event within a 3-month period, it's taken extra steps to treat all 18 of its spa pools. Its manager, Leisure, Rob McGee, says staff will investigate whether cleaning processes need to be improved.
We have confidence that they are meeting the water treatment and cleaning standards that are appropriate. But what we are doing, and again reassuring the public that we're reviewing those along with our environmental health team and key experts, say from the Public Health Service, to see whether any improvements could be made.
Rob McGee from the Auckland Council. In sport, despite being undone by the Australian bowlers on a green Basin Reserve wicket, Black Caps coach Mike Hesson hopes Hagley Oval will also be a green seamer-friendly pitch for the second cricket test. But Hesson says he'd preferred the Basin pitch to offer more assistance to all the bowlers.
I would have liked this to be much greener than it was. Certainly only seen for 2 hours, and I think that meant that both sides weren't able to be exposed in those conditions. So it's a bit different when it seems for 2 hours. It makes the toss a little bit more important.
New Zealand lost the first test in Wellington by a massive innings and 52 runs. The second test starts in Christchurch on Saturday. The Wellington Phoenix won't have the services of English striker Alex Jones on loan from Birmingham City after all. New Zealand Football has confirmed that FIFA's Player Status Committee has declined the Phoenix's application to approve the short-term loan transfer. It failed due to an online process that wasn't able to be completed in time before the A-League's registration window closed. A public holiday and the staff member responsible leaving the organisation also contributed to the debacle, which New Zealand Football Competitions Manager Daniel Farrow says is regrettable.
We're hugely disappointed in the outcome of the decision, and certainly for the Phoenix in this situation, and clearly for Alex himself.
And Rotorua golfer Danny Lee has reached a career-high number 34 on the World Golf Rankings after his positive start to the PGA Tour season. That's the news.
Counselling slashed.
Cases of mental health in Canterbury are going up, not down. The funding they are receiving is below the national average.
Underfunding denied.
None of the figures that we receive indicate that demand is outstripping supply.
Fight clubs in prisons.
How can a select committee hold a minister and his department to account if we're not given the full facts?
News, not views. Guy Espiner and Susie Ferguson Morning Report, weekdays from 6. Then on 9 to noon, the new International Commission trying to deal with the obesity pandemic. And after 10, Stanford University headache expert Robert Cowan on how to manage and prevent migraines, based in part on his own experience of chronic headaches. Join me, Catherine Ryan, after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met Service weather now through to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland, Waikato, Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Taupo. Cloudy, showers turning to rain tomorrow morning, becoming heavy later in the day. Waitomo, Taumarunui, Taranaki, Whanganui and Taihape, mainly fine with isolated showers. Rain developing tomorrow morning, becoming heavy later. Manawatu, Horowhenua, Kapiti Coast, Wellington, also Gisborne to Wairarapa, scattered rain developing tomorrow evening. Nelson and northern Marlborough, also Bulletu Fiordland, mostly cloudy, rain becoming heavy tonight and thundery tomorrow. For the rest of Marlborough and Canterbury, fine and warm, rain developing inland tomorrow with scattered falls further east. Otago and Southland, isolated showers clearing tonight, rain early tomorrow afternoon, heavy and possibly thundery inland, and mostly fine for the Chatham Islands. It's just gone 5:09.
Thanks, Katrina. Coming up before 5:30, the Children's Commissioner on the conditions some of our children are living in. He'll be with us in about 10 minutes. And Jane and Martin Weeks on news of what may be justice at last for their triplets lost in that mall fire in Doha in 2012. But first, both sides of what happened in Mangere, and boy, they are very different. A man whose 6-year-old son was pepper sprayed during a large brawl on a street in the South Auckland suburbs says the police response was over the top. Residents say up to 20 police officers were called to Lavinia Crescent in Mangere just after 10 o'clock on Sunday morning after a person was allegedly stabbed during a domestic dispute. Footage of the incident put up on social media shows officers and residents fighting. And the 6-year-old who'd been riding his bike near the chaos walk away rubbing his eyes. First of all, our police reporter Carla Penman speaking to angry residents.
Resident Puna Strickland says he saw a police officer punch a woman who'd been handcuffed.
She was not resisting or anything, she was just trying to help one of the ladies that was next door. And then it just got started from there, and then one cop came, another cop followed.
He says that's when things escalated. Mr Strickland says he saw a young boy get caught in the pepper spray crossfire and a young girl get thrown to the ground. The 6-year-old boy's father, who has asked not to be named, says he was sitting in his car when the police arrived.
What I witnessed was the police officer assaulting my next door neighbour, where she's already been detained. That's how it all started.
She was punched, right? That's what
and now we've just seen her get assaulted from the police officer, and we told him that there wasn't. She's already been detained, and there wasn't no need for that.
The man says it wasn't until his son came running to him, rubbing his eyes, that he realised he'd been sprayed.
My 6-year-old, he was fine after that. It was like 10 minutes, washed it out, and then took him up to the A&E there, because it wasn't only him. It was like my pregnant daughter was pregnant, because they were out here when that happened, because it happened so fast. They were out here to get them away from it. It was too late. It was too late, the damage had been done.
He says his 17-year-old daughter had to go to hospital because of what appeared to be pepper spray burns, and he's upset at the way the police acted.
They shouldn't have did that in front of the kids. It was what their priority is, to keep the community safe. That's the priority, ain't it? Was that the priority in that video? No. You can obviously see the kids there.
The man says despite what he believes was an over-the-top police response, he isn't going to lay a complaint. But it's a different story for mother of two, Maria Panapa, who lives a few houses down from where the incident took place.
It was just cars and cars full of police against some of the locals and residents of the street. I don't know exactly what happened. I heard there was a stabbing. Then it just turned into a brawl against all the people and the police.
She says a female officer came over to where she was standing, some distance away from the action, and tried to frighten her and her 2 young girls aged 2 and 3 into moving.
We were standing there and she came and said that I need to get back into my house, it's not safe, and then loaded her gun right in front of me and my kids.
Ms Panapa says she's very angry that such an unnecessary thing was done in front of her children. She says she's considering laying a formal complaint with the police. 3 people have been charged with assaulting, resisting and obstructing police. In Auckland for Checkpoint, Carla Penman.
The county's Manukau West Area Commander is Jason Hewitt. I spoke to him earlier and asked him first of all what happened on the street on Sunday.
Well, police were called by ambulance to assist with an alleged stabbing at a family violence incident. So we were there obviously trying to help a victim of a stabbing and also trying to investigate what had led to that.
And then what happened?
Well, upon arrival at the scene, police were met with hostile occupants of that address. The police were essentially being told to F off. They were trying to calm everyone down and making the point that, hey, we're actually there to help the victim of the alleged stabbing. But unfortunately, that hostility escalated and they were forced to make an arrest for obstructing police. Unfortunately, during all that time, there was lots of yelling and screaming, as you can imagine, and that yelling and screaming attracted the attention of other residents in the street who all piled out to come and see what was going on. And then they piled in and ended up attacking the police, spitting at the police. The police had to withdraw and call for backup. And there's a video clip, I understand, from someone with a cell phone that shows the police turning up and having to arrest a person. Unfortunately, as that arrest was being effected, a lot of the other people that were there then attacked the police to try and prevent that arrest from taking place, and they were forced to actually use the tactical option of pepper spray to keep the people back so they could safely effect the arrest.
OK, so pepper spray was used, that's not in dispute?
Not at all.
Was it sprayed directly at a 6-year-old boy?
No, it was not. My staff emphatically deny that. They sprayed adults who were surging in to help prevent them arresting. Unfortunately, and you can see it from the video clip, there is even a woman holding a baby on her hip running towards the melee and other kids mingling around. Now, it's a truly regrettable thing, but when we have to deploy pepper spray to keep ourselves and other members of the public safe, sometimes people can be cross-contaminated by the pepper spray, and that is what has happened in this case.
Did you have to deploy pepper spray? Do you stand by the decision to use it in those circumstances?
Yes, I absolutely do. I've had a debrief with my staff. They were struggling violently with an offender that they were trying to arrest, and other members of the public then surged in towards them to try and prevent that arrest. They feared for their safety and the safety of the people that they were dealing with. Pepper spray was a safe and legitimate option.
I suppose, and I'm not being cynical here, but I suppose they would say that. They're hardly going to come back and say, hey boss, we got a bit carried away, we used pepper spray and we shouldn't have.
John, I'll put it this way. If everyone had stayed home and minded their own business, then this wouldn't be happening today.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's beyond dispute. But the issue is your people are trained to deal with these situations. Do you believe they could have dealt with it without using pepper spray?
No, I don't. Not when they're on the ground struggling with a violent offender and other people are piling in to prevent any further injury to themselves or the person they're arresting. I believe they had very limited options open to them.
Was there a pregnant woman there, do you know?
Listen, I have no idea.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Did a police officer...
I do know there were women and children present, and as you can see on the video clip, women were spitting at police officers. They were screaming abuse in front of their own children. I think it's appalling behaviour. My staff are still very perplexed because they actually turned up to help a victim who was allegedly stabbed. The last thing they expected was to have the entire neighbourhood turn on them, as was the case here.
One of the allegations that has been made to our reporter is that a female police officer loaded her gun in front of the crowd to scare them back. Did that happen?
Honestly, John, I can't answer that because I'm not aware of that at all. No one's brought it to my attention.
Would you have expected firearms to be brandished in any way in those circumstances?
Listen, we have a wide range of tactical options available to us. If things were escalating, if my officers decided that they needed to place a firearm on their hip in anticipation of any escalation, they are entitled to do so. That's part of their discretion. However, I am unable to advise in this case because I have not been informed of that happening.
Were any police officers injured?
No, I'm happy to say that as a result of the deployment of the pepper spray, that affected what was desired was to get people stopping their attack. Obviously, they stood around and continued to yell abuse at us, but were able to effect the arrest properly without any further problems.
At the height of what was going on, how many officers were there, police officers were there?
I'll be able to give you that information, John. I just don't have it with me right now.
Okay, there looks to have been quite a few.
Yes, well, as I say, the first officers were forced to withdraw and call for backup, so other officers came from across the district to help.
I think that people looking at this footage will think it's a nightmare job being a police officer in circumstances like these. But it is the job of a police officer, right, to be able to handle circumstances like these. And I guess the issue comes back to a sense coming from people in the community that police overreacted.
It's always easy to second-guess police actions, particularly when you've got a very brief clip of video without seeing the whole thing in its entirety. The truth of the matter is, I really believe that those people that were there were actually the author of their own misfortune. This was a complete surprise to us. I actually imagine that it's quite a surprise to the people that were there, and I imagine a few of them are quite embarrassed as to their behaviour with the benefit of hindsight.
As is often the case in these circumstances, is a real quality of completely different descriptions coming from the two parties involved. The police saying one thing, which you're saying very forcefully and consistently now, the witnesses on the ground saying something different. Is this a case for the IPCA to try and work out exactly what happened?
Well, at this point in time, there's been no formal complaint made. If that happens, we'll hand it to the appropriate authorities to investigate, as we always do. I stand by my officers. As I say, they were there dealing with a very serious crime, trying to do the best, and they were turned on unreasonably, in my opinion, by other members of the community who had no right to even be there.
That was Area Commander Inspector Jason Hewitt. It's coming up to 20 minutes past 5 on Checkpoint. This bill is shameful. Those are the words not of an opposition political party or a special interest group, but the Children's Commissioner, the Children's Watchdog, and a man who's not been prone to inflammatory statements in his time in that job. Dr. Russell Wills is talking about a new bill being heard by a parliamentary committee which he says was originally intended to improve the poor quality of rental housing but is now failing to achieve that. He's describing the Residential Tenancies Amendment Bill as, and I quote, a wasted opportunity. The Children's Commissioner, whose 5-year term ends in the middle of the year, will be presenting to the Select Committee tomorrow, but tonight he is live in our Wellington studio. Dr. Russell Wills, welcome to Checkpoint. I want to begin with what you have seen about the conditions children, our poorest children, are living in New Zealand. Can you describe what you've seen?
The families that we see on children's ward with respiratory infections, John, often live in appalling housing. This is cold, damp, mouldy. Sometimes it's not fit for human habitation, some of this housing.
And they are presenting with illnesses like bronchiectasis, which you believe, and people like Ines Asher believe, are a direct response to the conditions they're living in.
John, we're paediatricians. We're interested in evidence, not ideology. The evidence is very clear that the only children who get these conditions are children living in cold, damp, mouldy, crowded housing.
Now, people either believe you or they don't. You wrote a thing for the New Zealand Herald in December and you described conditions like this. The first comment at the bottom of it is that your assessment of poverty is wildly overstated. Is that the case? Is poverty real in New Zealand and are children living in it?
It is. This is data from the government. So we're not making this stuff up. This is data that's consistent with the same definitions that are used throughout the world, particularly in the OECD and Scandinavia. So there's nothing exceptional about this. You know, 1 in 7 children in New Zealand currently miss out on 6 or more of the basics, things like a warm, dry house, food on the table 3 times a day, their own bed, stationery, warm, dry clothes, those kinds of things. This is not something we just pulled out of the air. This is the government's own figures from reliable school information.
Now, when the 2013 budget came out, suggesting a trial warrant of fitness for private and state housing, government made a promise to New Zealand children: we will make your house healthy. I'm reading from your media statement, but I remember your response to that at the time. You took them at their word, you congratulated them, you celebrated the possibilities, and you looked forward to seeing it happen. Has it happened?
No, John, it hasn't. And that's the really disappointing part about this. I think that the May 2013 statement about a warrant of fitness was a promise to our children. We care about you and we will do what we can to make your houses healthy. This bill does not do that.
The Residential Tenancies Amendment Bill needs to do what, do you think, in order to address the kinds of conditions you are describing?
There's 3 things that are missing that I think will be quite straightforward and not particularly expensive. The first one is there needs to be a single standard for insulation, and that should be the current code. All houses that are rented to New Zealanders should be at the current code. That should be quite straightforward. The second is we should have a heating and ventilation standard. We've got the most astute researchers in the world who can advise government about what that standard should be and how to do it cost effectively. The third thing is that we need to have an enforcement regime. The people that we're seeing on children's wards never complain to the Tenancy Tribunal. They don't and they won't. So expecting them to go to the tribunal simply won't work.
Your time as Children's Commissioner ends in June, right? And I have a sense, having watched you, that you believe that all you would have to do is explain from a position of calm, dispassionate common sense the conditions that children were living in, and you would be able to effect a change. Are you frustrated by the difficulty you have had in effecting a change?
I think government's done a lot of good things for children in the last 4 years, particularly since we published our Expert Advisory Group's report. So, insulating houses is a good thing to do. Early childhood education is a good thing to do. Raising benefits, $25 a week, those are good things to do. But this is a basic, John. The environment that children, particularly young children, spend most of their time in is their own house. The environment that has the biggest effect on children's health is their house, and yet that's the least regulated aspect of our environment. It simply makes no sense. We should be able to guarantee for all children in our country that they will live in a warm, dry, healthy house. This bill doesn't do that, and I think it should.
And this is the point you will be making to the Select Committee tomorrow?
I will.
Dr. Russell Wills, Children's Commissioner, thank you for joining us on Checkpoint this evening. 5:25 on Checkpoint. Coming up next, almost 4 years after a mall fire killed their triplets, a Qatar court has ruled a retrial of the 5 people who were convicted and then acquitted. Actually, they've quashed an appeal effectively. Martin and Jane Weeks are with us. Such a terrible case, and the fight for justice has been so hard. And later in the show, tectonics expert Mark Quigley on why the ground is still shaking in the South Island. What is going on? We would love your feedback on everything that we're talking about tonight. Russell Wills in particular, but also what took place on the street in Mangere, and how the two versions of events that can be so profoundly different to be expected, I suppose, but they are chalk and cheese in this case. Text 2101, email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz, or Checkpoint RNZ is our Twitter and Facebook address. In May 2012, 2-year-old triplets, Jackson, Lily and Wilshire Weeks, were killed in a fire in the Villaggio Mall in Doha. The 3 New Zealand toddlers were among 19 people who died in the fire. 13 children, 4 staff members of the nursery the children were in, and 2 firefighters. An emergency exit was blocked. Flammable materials had been used throughout the nursery, and what could potentially have been a fairly straightforward evacuation became a calamity. In the 4 years since, the triplets' parents, Jane and Martin Weeks, have fought and fought for someone to be held responsible. Original convictions for involuntary manslaughter against the mall's owners and managers were overturned by the Qatari Appeal Court after a hearing that left families confused, distressed and angry. More on that in a moment. Now, today, the Appeals Court decision has been overturned. Another appeal does seem certain, but Martin and Jane Weeks won't give up until someone is held responsible for the deaths.
It's not just Lily, Jackson and Wilshire, it's their 10 friends. It's also any other New Zealander who's living in Qatar. We don't want this to happen to anyone. We don't want people to feel that there is no justice, and that there's no one looking after them.
Can we talk about what the appeal court decided? And I think most fascinatingly, and this is me saying this, not you, but most appallingly, was the evidence that they excluded. What did the appeal court rule as inadmissible?
The appeal court ruled all evidence submitted by the families was inadmissible because we couldn't be plaintiffs as well as victims, and the entire case hinged around the fact that the nursery was a nursery, which we proved with all of our documentation signed by the defendants, and without that they were able to stand up and say it wasn't a nursery. The other thing which was really disturbing was that the judge threw out the evidence submitted by civil defence and the independent report saying that there were flammable mouldings and flammable paint. He ruled that as inadmissible, and I still don't understand why.
And yet it was the case. There was flammable mouldings and there was flammable paints.
I've got the documents. I have the documents which actually prove that.
So not only did you lose your triplets in circumstances which are too appalling to even contemplate, the most simple justice was being denied.
Yeah, it was being denied, and the judge, his view was he was looking for, I guess he was erring towards that the defendants had more privilege than the victims. And in effect what he did was he actually ruled out the voice of the victims, and therefore there was nothing there to contradict what the defendants said, and they said whatever they needed to say to change the verdict.
And everything they said was accepted, admitted and upheld, and almost everything that you said and the people speaking on behalf of the children said was excluded?
We weren't allowed to speak. We weren't allowed to speak, and our written evidence wasn't allowed to be submitted, even the evidence from the original trial.
This is heartbreaking stuff, Jane, isn't it?
Very much so.
And in the meantime, the defendants are doing what?
The same as they always did. As far as I'm aware, the mall manager, who should have been the person responsible for the safety procedures, still has his job, hasn't spent a day in prison. The owner of the nursery, who also should have been responsible for making sure there was proper evacuation procedures in place. Again, her and her husband, the wife and Qatar's ambassador to Belgium, they are still in their position overseas there. There's been nothing that has had them take any responsibility or ownership. We've never even had an apology or any type of, we're so sorry this happened, this is what we're going to learn from it.
You haven't even had an apology?
No.
Fire exits blocked?
Mm-hmm.
Flammable materials used?
Mm-hmm.
That are still there. The flammable materials and paint are still there, and the mall has not replaced those.
So after all of this, after the exhaustion and then the elation, I guess, of getting Parker and Poppy, and the tenacity and the singularity, particularly, Martin, of your pursuit of some kind of justice, what do you hope for now?
I guess we do hope for some level of justice. We were never, from the start, we didn't expect, even if a verdict was given and a sentence was given, we didn't expect them to go to jail. I guess at least having a verdict that says you are accountable, you are responsible, that is what I would like to see, that somebody's held accountable. Whether that translates into some form of punishment, that's not really the issue for me. I want that somebody's held accountable and that people actually realise that they can't do this. Buildings have to be made safe, the public have to be taken care of, and that it won't happen again.
Martin and Jane Weeks, we will let you know what happens at the appeal court. Coming up, the monetary value of a tertiary education. We dig down into those figures. We're live at the Grammys with one of the great critics, and we speak to a couple in Christchurch who separated before the earthquakes but still can't move on. Nona's here with business news, but first here's Katrina Batten with the news headlines.
A father says he's shocked his 6-year-old son was pepper sprayed during a large brawl between police and neighbours on a South Auckland street. Footage on social media shows a 6-year-old walking away, rubbing his eyes after being caught in the crossfire while riding his bike near the chaos on Lavinia Crescent in Mangere. The police say the use of pepper spray was legitimate. New analysis shows 60% of the extra earnings associated with tertiary qualifications are cancelled by student loans and the potential wages lost while studying. The university's New Zealand figures show graduates with a bachelor's degree working full-time earn an average of $1.4 million more than people with no tertiary qualifications over their working lives. But after accounting for student loans and the time spent studying rather than working, that margin falls to $552,000. Fairfax Media today told 70 of its editorial team their jobs will go as part of an outsourcing proposal the company says will save it money. The jobs will be moved to an Australian-based company called PageMasters. The sub-editors currently work from New Zealand, sub-editing for Fairfax's Australian metropolitan mastheads, including the Sydney Morning Herald. 130 meat workers in Southland are waiting for news about their jobs after being sent home suddenly a week ago. The Meat Workers Union says managers at the Prime Range Meats factory in Invercargill told the workers unexpectedly last Tuesday they were being suspended. The company was taken over by a Chinese company 15 months ago. Auckland Council says people are at very low risk if they use public spa pools in the region after Legionella bacteria was detected in 2 facilities. The council has closed spa pools at the Tepid Baths on the city's waterfront and at Manurewa after the bacteria was found on separate occasions. Those are the headlines. I'll have more news, sport and weather at 6.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina. Let's turn to business news now with Nona Peltier. And Nona, you have been looking at a real indicator of of what? Where the economy's at, where inflation might go, how people are feeling, and that is retail spending.
Yes, we had a couple of things come out today. One of them was the retail spending. Now, so spending overall is up. That's a positive sign for the economy, but prices are flat. Confusing.
Yeah, it is.
It means that people are spending more, but they're getting more for their money, but the prices are low and they're flat, and that is a concern because that isn't going to drive inflation if prices remain steady. And we've seen...
Why is that a concern? Why do people want inflation?
Well, nobody really wants inflation too high.
So the paradox is the Reserve Bank is there to control it.
Yeah.
But actually their range is 1 to 3, isn't it?
Yes, and right now we've had 0.1%, so it's just into the black, so to speak, in terms of where you look at inflation. But the expectations have come out today. So they do a survey of expectations, inflation expectations, and they do it every 3 months. The one that's just come out shows that inflation expectations for 2 years looking out has fallen. And it's fallen to 1.63%, which is lower than the last survey at 1.85%. So imagine in 2 years from now, businesses are only expecting inflation to be at 1.63%.
This is confusing, isn't it? So in fact, consumer spending was up.
Overall,
and really strong quarter in the Christmas quarter, right?
Yes, it was strong. It was up 5% year on year, but the actual price that people are paying for things is flat.
So what does that tell us?
Well, it's a confusing
like everything at the moment.
But,
like everything at the moment, Nona.
But it really reflects, a lot of that is the oil prices, of course, because we're not seeing that flowing through into import. Like we're importing deflation. I'm not an economic expert, but it's baffling a lot of people on how these indicators really work together.
And it leaves the Reserve Bank completely bewildered, I suspect, about where they go next.
Well,
right?
we've got
Because
economists.
the conventional wisdom is you stimulate by lowering interest rates. But it doesn't really look like Graham Wheeler wants to do that.
No, and we've got, different views. I mean, some economists are saying this points to lower interest rates and the Reserve Bank is going to cut. Others say, no, the Reserve Bank shouldn't cut because, look, this is just a blip and we have to wait to see a little bit more.
And people
it's
are
another
spending.
3 months, exactly.
Yeah.
And what has that done? Well, it's actually made our New Zealand dollar fall because some people are betting, because they're hedging, right? Well, maybe the Reserve Bank will move on interest rates now because that's given the Reserve Bank some reason, perhaps. So that saw the New Zealand dollar fall about half a cent against the American dollar and about a cent against the Australian. But then anything can change, as you know, day by day.
I can't recall a time when the markets have been quite as directionless and as uncertain and as susceptible to a daily vagary or whim.
I think it's because that the whole world doesn't know how to react to a low inflation environment. In fact, George Soros was interviewed not so long ago at the World Economic Forum, and he's an elderly man who made an awful lot of money hedging, of course, the markets. And he said that this kind of an environment has never been seen before in the markets, so we don't really know where we're going with this. The last time we saw such low inflation was during the Depression, when we didn't have the same global economic conditions that we have today. So yeah, it's difficult for the market to read. Economists are on different sides of the fence. Central banks are hedging their bets too. Anyway, nevertheless, our market was up 0.7% today, a rise of 41 points. We saw large volume. That was in A2 Milk. It's one of the companies that's reporting tomorrow. There's going to be a number tomorrow, including Fletcher Building. That's the big one for tomorrow. And so we'll see what happens again. We'll have another big day.
Yeah, I look forward to you telling us about Fletcher Building. Obviously, we've prefigured some of this with the money they've been spending, but Nona, you'll be back tomorrow to talk about all of that.
Yes, I will.
What did you study?
I studied journalism.
Okay, excellent.
Yes, I actually went to school.
Yeah, well, this next story relates to you and I, the value of a BA and journalism and all of that kind of stuff. Thanks, Nona. 22 minutes to 6. The value of a BA has been the butt of many jokes. BA, bugger all. When I was at Victoria University, there was a toilet roll dispenser that had BA Take One written above it, which I always felt was very, very mean. But someone has finally put a number on it and on other qualifications too. Analysis by Universities New Zealand shows how much extra income each type of qualification is worth over a full-time working life. Graduates with a Bachelor of Arts in Language and Literature are $300,000 better off than someone with no tertiary qualifications. A degree in medicine is worth $1.4 million extra, and a certificate in electrical engineering $580,000. Of course, this is not quite as simple or as straightforward as it seems. Our education correspondent John Gerritsen has been asking students what they think of those figures.
Sam McLean is doing a master's degree in geography at Victoria University in Wellington. If he's employed full-time, he should be $540,000 better off over his working life than someone with no tertiary qualifications. And he says that's good enough for him.
I would be happy with that. I mean, it's $500,000 I wouldn't have otherwise. I think education's a good investment, so for me to get $500,000 return would be, I'm pretty satisfied with that.
Okay. Now, I mean, we're having a look at this, there's a few other disciplines that pay a heck of a lot more. Banking and finance, for example. Let's see, law, you'd be looking at a return of over $1 million. You still happy with the choice you've made to study what you're studying?
Definitely. I wouldn't study anything else.
Why is that?
Well, law, accounting, finance, just absolutely no interest whatsoever.
Nearby, Cameron Smith was pleased to learn the commerce degree he's starting will make him $964,000 better off than a non-graduate, one of the higher returns for a bachelor's degree.
It's a good margin, as in it's something they would hope to get out of. That's why you would want to do a degree, to get $1 million more than people who don't.
Cameron's friend Tom Vile is also studying commerce and says the figures are likely to influence students' subject choices.
Yeah, I think it will definitely change up what they're doing because of the money side for sure, but yeah, if commerce is up there, I think even more people will take commerce for sure, yeah.
But master's student Avril McFarlane disagrees. She says financial returns are not the main motivation for most students.
People go to university obviously for a lot of different reasons, but I think a lot of the time it's because they have an interest in something and they're interested in pursuing higher education for the sake of higher education. I know I didn't go to university just with the sole thought of it's going to earn me a lot more money. A lot of my motivation was because I was interested in pursuing higher study.
The figures these students have been talking about are calculated after accounting for student loans and the time spent studying rather than working, factors that slash the earning margin for university graduates by about 2/3. The president of the Union of Students Associations, Lindsay Higgins, says that's a big cut.
It's scary that much is going to be taken up, and I think if we're placing such an emphasis on higher education being the gateway to a better income, then we need to transition that without making it as much of a burden.
Lindsay Higgins says higher income earners should pay more tax, but the government needs to make sure people are not deterred from tertiary education. For Checkpoint, John Gerritsen.
80 minutes to 6. The Earthquake Commission has had more than 1,000 claims already following Sunday's earthquake. EQC's Chief Executive Ian Simpson says it's too early to draw conclusions about the final number of claims or the total cost of damage, of course. But residents have 3 months until May 16th to make a claim. Claire and Graham Flynn's home in Bower Ave in the Christchurch suburb of Parklands, well, that dates back way before Sunday. The couple is insured with Southern Response and are part of a quake outcasts class action. But what makes their situation different is the couple separated before the 1st September quake and haven't been able to move on since. They can't sell their home because it hasn't been fixed. Claire and Graham join us now via live view from what was their marital home in Parklands. We really appreciate you joining us, you two. And I know this isn't easy for you, and I also know you've been hearing from Southern Response since we contacted them, but let's go back before that. How tough has the past 5 years been?
It's been really tough, John. What has happened with us is the fact that when the earthquakes occurred, we had already separated at that stage, and we were unable to move on as far as settling the marital property is concerned. And we are living in a substandard home now. I live in the home with my 2 children, and my niece now lives with me.
And so for 5 years, you have simply waited for some kind of resolution. Graham, can I go to you? Why has it taken so long?
It's basically been the inaction by Southern Response. If it wasn't for the court case action been taken to the court a few months ago, we'd probably still be waiting to hear from someone. Once they got wind of the court case action going ahead, all of a sudden they are here on our doorstep with their engineers and all of the people, and they're bending over backwards trying to see what they can do to help us, and it's just been, I suppose, relatively full on over the last few months. 16 months ago we went to a meeting in Addington. They promised that they would be in contact with us over the next 2 or 3 months and things would be moving at a great rate of knots. We never heard anything for 12 months until the court case was put together.
Hold on, can I just clarify that, Graham? So 16 months ago you were told that you would have some clarity and know where you stood within 2 or 3 months. You heard nothing for a year.
That's correct, John.
And Claire, what is the impact of that on you? Because not only is there uncertainty, there is the stress of living in a house which has, what's the variation in the floor level? What sort of damage did you sustain?
The lowest point in the floor is 140 mils between that and the highest point. So we've lived in a home that is basically on a hill.
And you're exhausted, aren't you?
I am, especially after the earthquake on Sunday. It just brought everything back to the surface again. And as a result, I actually became very nervous. I was very upset with that. In previous times, I hadn't been so upset because of the simple fact that we were kind of getting used to it. But then with the Sunday's earthquake, it just all come flooding back. And to be perfectly honest, I'm tired of it. I want to move on. I want to move away from this area, especially the east side of town, and I can't do anything.
Well, look, Graham and Claire, we've contacted Southern Response, and they say your claim is one of the more complicated it is dealt with due to the poor land. So, in fact, it's the land beneath the house that makes the rebuild difficult. They say the claim started off as a repair and as a result of technical input, including engineering reports. Bear in mind, this is over 5 years, although I don't need to tell you two that. It's now decided the best option is to rebuild the home. Southern Response says it expects to have a rebuild settlement offer ready to present to you later this week. It says they contacted you today, Claire, and you advised some cracks in the patio have widened but are not a hazard for you or your children. So it looks like something's happening at last. Is something happening at last? Will a rebuild settlement offer make a difference after 5 years, finally?
Yes, it will make a difference because we'll be able to move on, move away from this area and move somewhere where we don't feel the earthquakes as much.
Graham, should you have had to... Sorry.
Yes,
Claire.
I was contacted this afternoon by Southern Response asking after our health and safety, basically, and I was able to reassure them that we are still okay, we can live in this home, but I want it resolved. I need it resolved.
Graham, one final question to you. Should it have taken 5 years? Should we even be having this conversation with the 5th anniversary of the February quake on Monday?
Absolutely not, John. No, this should have been resolved at least 3 years ago. When we built this place, we were proud of it. I had an in-ground watering system in my lawn, and if your cameraman can pan down and show the lawn, it'll give some idea of how bad it is now. It's just nothing but weeds. But you're right, it shouldn't have taken 5 years, and it shouldn't have taken the threat of a court action to finally see some sort of response from Southern Response.
Claire and Graham Flynn live from what was their marital home in Bower Ave. 5 years. In fact, some of the damage, I think, was in September. We should also say that there was liquefaction, of course, back in that area on Sunday, which people were so desperate not to see again. Let's go briefly to Sumner, not too far away, where experts are trying to assess how much of the huge amount of rock above the community CBD has been loosened by Sunday's earthquake. It's not rocket science the way they're doing it, but then rocket science takes time. Brendan Winder from Land Information New Zealand, who joined us on Checkpoint yesterday, describes what they're doing instead of rocket science, simply using a high-pressure hose.
We're using a fire appliance from one of our contractors here to blast water into a crack. The idea being it'll open up that crack and cause it to collapse, or hopefully it'll just let us know that the area is stable and we can continue to operate nearby. So we're just continuing with our investigations after the Valentine's Day earthquake from a couple of days ago.
So that's a high pressure hose going on there. There's a hell of a lot of rock above that. What's the worst possible scenario?
The worst possible scenario is another quake about now, John, to be honest, and we're all really conscious of that. Good safety plans in place, and we've got an exit strategy for getting out of here. But we've got a really good machinery, good contractor and a good plan, so we're confident we can do this work.
And so what are you trying to achieve there, Brendan? Because you're really near the Sumner CBD. Obviously, life needs to return to normal there, whatever normal is these days. So what is the aim of this exercise?
To get this work done so that we understand the risks here, so we can get out of the way of the people in the community. While we're here, we know that we are disruptive and it upsets the trading locally. So as soon as we can find out that we can operate safely, we can get our guys back behind their fences and they can crack on with their work and get out of the way of the locals and the visitors.
Brendan Winder from below the rock in Sumner. 10 to 6. The government is expecting cash-strapped district health boards to save well over $100 million this year. The Labor Party has released details it obtained under the Official Information Act showing DHB's plan to make financial cuts totalling $163 million this financial year. But DHB say that's business as usual and they are on track to make the savings. Our health correspondent Karen Brown reports.
Labour's health spokesperson Annette King says the information reveals the size of cost pressures in a sector already stretched to the limit.
I believe that they've squeezed the lemon so hard in health that they're now down to the pips, and it's going to be very difficult for DHBs to make those efficiency gains because the only real place they can make them is with their staff.
The Nurses Organisation's industrial advisor, Leslie Harry, says she believes it's related to government demands that any DHBs with deficits cut them. But she says the cost savings reduce the ability of nurses to take leave, which isn't good for the workforce.
It's just death by 1,000 cuts. There's a whole range of ways that the funding cuts impact on our members, and that's one example. The other thing is that they're working inevitably short-staffed because of the savings that can be made by not backfilling.
Ian Powell of the Senior Doctors Union says the cost cutting is DHB's response to years of belt tightening.
Since about 2009, approximately over $1 billion in real terms has been taken out of the health system. And our public hospitals and other parts of our health system had to struggle along in that environment.
Those DHBs that were willing to comment said the savings targets are part of their annual plans and it's business as usual for organisations managing their budgets responsibly. Waikato DHB is listed as facing the largest savings, tasked with finding $43.3 million in efficiencies from its $1.3 billion budget. It says that will be achieved by small changes, including greater use of telehealth and adjustments to how it handles external referrals. Maureen Crystal is the Corporate Services Director.
We're looking at a piece of technology that will integrate those so that we don't have to data capture. Clearly that staff group is affected, but we are as fair and transparent as possible, and we have very few redundancies. Because we have such a big staff, we are able to redeploy.
The Chief Executive of Wellington's Capital and Coast DHB, Debbie Chin, says it's pledged to save $22.8 million, but it will actually save $40 million this financial year. She says that'll bring its deficit down from $68 million a few years ago to just $4 million, but the public won't notice.
We've been very careful around our efficiency program to ensure that we're looking at reducing duplication, finding efficiencies, reducing waste, because every dollar we save is a dollar we can reinvest in health services in our community.
Auckland DHB declined to comment, but Counties Manukau, which is tasked with saving $20 million, says it is always seeking to work better and more efficiently with no cost to services or staff. The Health Minister, Jonathan Coleman, says the savings, which go back into health, represents less than 1% of the health budget and are reasonable. For Checkpoint, Karen Brown.
Coming up to 6 minutes to 6, pretty heavy old program so far, so let's change the subject entirely and go to the Grammys. Held in LA, of course, this afternoon, our time. Kendrick Lamar seems to have cleaned up, although I've been busy, so I haven't quite caught up with it. I did see, though, his sensational performance of The Black of the Berry. Mind-blowingly good, which Sam Wick said to me. Thanks, Sam. Lady Gaga also had a moment, I'm told, in honour of David Bowie, a breathless, bonkers, whistle-stop tour of his career. It's being described as Courtney Barnett was robbed as Best New Artist. That's just a personal opinion. Megan Trainor, you're joking. Justin Bieber's performance was panned. Taylor Swift may be feeling some regret too. We're joined by Sasha Freer-Jones, one of the world's most distinguished music critics, now of the LA Times, and for over a decade, the New Yorker's pop critic. Live from LA. Sasha, it's a privilege to have you on the program. What did you think of the show?
Thank you so much for the kind words, and thank you for having me on. The Grammys are an odd thing. I got to say, I'm having some feelings right now. Kendrick Lamar was the album of the year. What just happened was wrong. We're going to get back to that. As a show, it started off, ironically, really well with a really good Taylor performance. And then Kendrick won for Rap Album. And the feeling in the room was really, really palpable. Like, people were excited. And so we sort of had a 1-2, and things got then mired in lots and lots of medleys, so many medleys, so many slow songs. The Grammys always moved away from dance and pop, which is crazy because why else are we here? And so many medleys, and they got slow. And there were some good moments. And, Alabama Shake's got a couple that's great. Before the show, D'Angelo got a couple of big ones, which was great. But Kendrick not winning Album of the Year is just wrong at every level, just every level.
Okay, so explain to me what happened there, because I haven't caught up with this at all, Sasha. So who won Album of the Year?
Taylor Swift.
Okay, and you, so Kendrick's album, in your opinion, was just demonstrably better than 1989?
By a moral and aesthetic factor that I can't even really measure. But let me be clear. This is allegedly, and I do believe them, this is a thing that people vote in. So, the idea here is that 1989 got more votes, and if that's the case, that's the case. So be it. But it's hard to know what to do with moments like this because, there's a screening process where, albums are submitted and people decide what should be nominated. There was a lot of love for Kendrick in the room. People were very, very excited for him. Very, very excited for Stevie Wonder. Very excited for Hamilton, a musical we have going on in America, in New York, which is basically a sort of rap retelling of American history. And then Kendrick did one of the most astonishing performances
Unbelievable.
I've ever seen.
Yeah, absolutely mind-blowingly brilliant. But at some level, maybe slightly for some people, middle Americans, and I'm being lazy and using broad brushstrokes, slightly uncomfortable. And is that the thing about the Grammys? That Taylor's music is comfortable and accessible and good, obviously, and Kendrick's music is somewhat scarier. Is that why he didn't win?
I think that's a fair assessment. I feel like I've been sort of backed into not liking Taylor because I've long liked her music, but she's turned into a slightly different beast. And I don't just mean in terms of the music. 1989 is a good record. I like Red even more. I don't care what genre she's in. She's really good at what she does. But there is this sort of slightly scary hegemony vibe to her, like, bringing everyone into her orbit. And 1989 is definitely probably an easier record for people across America than To Pimp a Butterfly.
Yeah.
But the Academy, the Academy, interestingly, they wrote me a letter after I wrote a piece about the Grammys thing that actually they were sort of in touch and the nominations were basically not embarrassing. And I love Courtney Barnett too, but remember there is a slightly mythic thing about the Best New Artist curse.
Yeah.
It's probably not actually borne out by the fact that a lot of great people win it, but it has zapped a few people. So Courtney will be fine.
Sasha, I'm going to ask you a big metaphysical question, and the problem is that we are brutal about having to end it at 6 o'clock, which is in 1 minute and 10 seconds. After the Oscars, is this another example of the establishment not knowing how to deal with black artists?
We have very little time. I'm just going to say yes.
No, wait, I need you to elaborate for 50 seconds.
Well, yes. This is, everybody can punt and say, well, this is how the vote shakes out. But the Grammy has, the Recording Academy has a lot of language they sent to me personally and they say in public about recognizing artistry. And I'm sorry, To Pimp a Butterfly was just such an important record in a year where American race relations were at an absolute low, and he was, he began the performances you saw in Prison Chains.
Yeah.
He's talking about mass incarceration, police brutality, and just as a performer, as a visionary, I'm sorry, it was the album of the year. And the Grammys, however they do what they do, if we end up with Taylor winning album of the year and Leo winning actor of the year for that boring, wet rug movie, it's not a good look.
Sasha Frere-Jones, thank you so much, live from LA. I hope you love music as much as I do, and I hope you found that interview as fascinating as I did. Boy, oh boy, Kendrick Lamar, according to Sasha Frere-Jones, robbed. Thank you for joining us on Checkpoint in the next half hour. Counselling services in the spotlight in Christchurch. What price? Mental health. Meat workers suspended from their jobs in Invercargill, and the countdown until the 2016 rugby season kicks off. Yes, the rugby season is only a week and a half away. But first, here's the news with Katrina Batten.
Ngā mihi nui, good evening. The police say it's regrettable that a 6-year-old boy was accidentally pepper sprayed during a brawl on a street in South Auckland. Footage put up on social media shows a large police presence and a number of residents involved in a fight on Lavinia Crescent in Mangere on Sunday morning, and a young boy walking away rubbing his eyes. The county's Manukau West Area Commander Jason Hewitt told Checkpoint things escalated out of control and backup had to be called for. He says the pepper spray was not intentionally used on the child.
Adults who were surging in to help prevent them arresting. Unfortunately, and you can see it from the video clip, there is even a woman holding a baby on her hip running towards the melee and other kids mingling around.
Jason Hewitt says if a complaint is laid, it will be investigated. He also says he isn't aware of a report that a police officer loaded up her gun in front of a resident and her 2 young girls in a bid to scare them off. New analysis shows 60% of the extra earnings associated with tertiary qualifications are cancelled by student loans and the potential wages lost while studying. The university's New Zealand figures show graduates with a bachelor's degree working full-time earn an average of $1.4 million more than people with no tertiary qualifications over their working lives. But after accounting for student loans and the time spent studying rather than working, that margin falls to $552,000. For some qualifications, the net result is negative, with graduates of complementary therapy degrees and some education certificates more than $75,000 worse off than non-graduates. Fairfax Media today told 70 of its editorial team their jobs will go as part of an outsourcing proposal the company says will save it money. The jobs will be moved to an Australian-based editorial company called PageMasters. The sub-editors currently work from New Zealand, sub-editing for Fairfax's Australian metropolitan mastheads, including the Sydney Morning Herald. Fairfax says it will consult with staff over the next 2 weeks. A source at Fairfax told RNZ News the 70 sub-editors were informed during a teleconference call. The Meat Workers Union says the situation is worsening by the day for Invercargill workers suspended suddenly from a factory a week ago. 130 meat workers from the Prime Range Meats plant were sent home last Tuesday without warning nor any word on when they might resume. Control of the company was taken over by a Chinese-backed company, Luan Hua Trading Group, 15 months ago. The union's Otago Southland Secretary, Gary Davis, says he has 20 members at the plant and they're nervous. He says many of the workers live week to week and are now in financial strife. The Children's Commissioner says the government's bill aimed at improving the quality of rental housing fails to protect children from cold, damp and mouldy homes. The Residential Tenancies Amendment Bill is currently being heard by a parliamentary committee. Russell Wills told Checkpoint the bill is shameful and a wasted opportunity to finally guarantee children a warm, healthy home.
The environment that children, particularly young children, spend most of their time in is their own house. The environment that has the biggest effect on children's health, and yet that's the least regulated aspect of our environment. It simply makes no sense.
Dr Wills says there needs to be a single standard for insulation, heating and ventilation. He'll be presenting at the Select Committee tomorrow. Counsellors, doctors and residents insist there is demand for counselling services in Christchurch. This is despite the Ministry of Social Development cutting funding to community-based counselling organisations from $1.5 million to $200,000. Catherine Hutton reports.
Residents spoken to by RNZ News have told of long delays accessing counselling services. GPs and counsellors in the city say 5 years on, there are still areas of untapped demand as people continue to deal with insurers and the EQC. One GP, Jeremy Baker, says suicide rates are rising, while the current system struggles to cope with cases of depression and anxiety. He says often patients are unaware their physical complaints are indicative of mental health problems. But the Minister of Social Development, Anne Tolley, says no funding has been cut and it's a demand-driven service. She says anyone who wants counselling can get it. This is Catherine Hutton.
In sport, the Black Caps cricket coach Mike Hesson says he's in favour of using video technology to rule on no balls in the wake of the controversy over the Adam Voges non-dismissal in Australia's huge win in Wellington. Voges was legitimately bowled when he was on 7 in the first test after the umpire mistakenly signalled a no ball, and he went on to make 239. An International Cricket Council committee will discuss the issue again at its next meeting, and Hesson likes the idea of using technology to increase the percentage of correct calls.
I think players, coaches, spectators want, the more decisions right, the better. So if we can use technology to do that, then, decisions like that become less influential. So, I think that's something that the ICC are obviously aware of and will discuss.
New Zealand Breakers centre Alex Pledger is laid up in bed with a virus at the team's Melbourne hotel 2 days out from the start of the Australian basketball playoffs. Shooting guard Corey Webster's arrived, however, following the birth of his baby boy, and he will suit up against Melbourne United in Thursday's semi-finals series opener. Webster's return is a huge relief to Breakers assistant coach Judd Flavel.
The timing worked out well. Obviously, we had a few road games over the last couple of weeks, and you never know when baby's going to come. So everybody had that one in the back of their minds, and it seems to be carrying on the Breakers tradition where every year we seem to have a couple of babies come on board.
And the latest debacle by New Zealand football has been confirmed, with FIFA declining the Wellington Phoenix's attempt loan transfer of Birmingham City striker Alex Jones due to a late online application process. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, the Nepalese odyssey of Andre Budd. He was high up in the Himalayas when the earthquake struck last year. We have a window on the world of Cassandro, a Mexican wrestler who also happens to be a drag queen. And this week's pundit, Deborah Russell, brings a feminist viewpoint to the issue of sexual harassment. She's not a fan of blurring the lines. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Met service weather to midnight tomorrow: Northland, Auckland, Waikato, Coromandel Bay of Plenty and Taupo. Cloudy, showers turning to rain tomorrow morning, becoming heavy later in the day. Waitomo, Taumarunui, Taranaki, Whanganui, Taihape, mainly fine with isolated showers. Rain developing tomorrow morning, becoming heavy later. Manawatu, Horowhenua, Kapiti Coast, Wellington, also Gisborne to Wairarapa, scattered rain developing tomorrow evening. Nelson and Northern Marlborough, also Bulletu Fiordland, and mostly cloudy, rain becoming heavy tonight and thundery tomorrow. For the rest of Marlborough and Canterbury, fine and warm, rain developing inland tomorrow with scattered falls further east. Otago and Southland, isolated showers clearing tonight, rain early tomorrow afternoon, heavy and possibly thundery inland. And the Chatham Islands mostly fine. It's 6:08.
Thanks, Katrina. Lots of interest in this next story. Counsellors, doctors and residents insist there is demand for counselling services in Christchurch. This despite the Ministry of Social Development cutting funding to community-based counselling organisations from $1.5 million to $200,000. The Ministry has also made no firm decisions about the future of counselling services in the city after the middle of the year. Catherine Hutton reports.
Christchurch resident Victoria sought counselling after a family member committed suicide last year. After waiting 5 weeks for an appointment, she finally saw a counsellor, but cancelled a second meeting more than a month later because it was taking too long between appointments. She says it shows how stretched counselling services in Christchurch are, particularly for those who can't afford to go private.
My concern for people after the earthquakes recently is if they were accessing counselling, that, you know, if you've got a child who has to wait more than 3 weeks just for an initial phone call, that they're pretty traumatised now, just have to wait because there's no other option.
Another Christchurch resident says she has suffered mental health problems after the 2011 quake. And 4 weeks ago, she says she was referred to a counsellor at the District Health Board, but she's still waiting to be called for an appointment.
After 4 weeks, I still don't have an appointment. All I've had is a letter. Then there is a demand and it's unmet.
Local GP Jeremy Baker is a mental health consultant for the primary health provider Pegasus Health. He refers patients to government-funded services. Dr Baker says rather than demand declining, he and other surgeries are just seeing the tip of the iceberg.
Secondary care is going to tell you that their workforce is under extreme stress. Suicide rates are rising, depression, anxiety are in no way being covered, I think, by present services. The availability of counselling may be there, but the support and the funding still needs to be lifted to make it accessible.
Jeff King is the director of Petersgate Counselling Centre in Christchurch, which is funded to provide 20 state-funded counselling sessions a month. He says while demand for the counselling service has declined, there are still areas of untapped demand.
5 years after the main event, still some very complex cases of people seeking settlement with housing repairs, complex psychosocial issues still going on, and in cases people who've coped pretty well, but cumulatively getting really tired and exhausted with the ongoing sort of challenges they face with insurers or with the EQC or whatever.
Dr Baker says often people don't understand what they're going through.
People still don't quite understand the depth of what happens physiologically from stress. They don't quite understand anxiety issues. The tendency for a lot of people is to try to cope, is try to do it on their own, try to keep it in-house, not to be stigmatised.
But the Social Development Minister Anne Tolley is defending the Ministry's actions.
No funding's been cut. That's very mischievous to say that. It is demand-driven funding. So $13.5 million was appropriated over 14 years. It's drawn down as it's needed. If demand goes up, the money's there. The important thing is anyone who wants counselling can get access.
Anne Tolley says the government is now looking at different ways of reaching into the community. For Checkpoint, Catherine Hutton.
130 meat workers in Southland are waiting for news about their jobs after suddenly being sent home a week ago. The Meat Workers Union says managers at the Prime Range Meats factory in Invercargill told the workers unexpectedly last Tuesday they were being suspended. The company was taken over by a Chinese company, Lianhua Trading Group, 15 months ago with promises to expand the business and create jobs. The union's Otago Secretary Gary Davis joins us on the phone now. Thanks for joining us, Gary. What is going on here?
Yeah, we'd all like to know that, John. These people have been left in limbo down here, just straight out of the blue. They were told that they weren't going to be processing any more stock. Apparently the new Chinese owner was somewhere in New Zealand and hadn't organised the finance for the business. The excuse was it was the Chinese New Year and the banking system wasn't working over there at that time. I don't know how much truth is in that. But yeah, these guys are really concerned what may happen. hopefully that this finance can be secured in the very near future and people can get back to work. But,
so Gary, it seems that your new owners have simply run out of money.
Well, look, there's a whole lot of rumours that have gone on about this particular company. About 15 months ago, it was sold by Tony Ford and Inky Tulloch for millions of dollars to this Chinese company. I understand that at the same time, the Tallys were interested in buying the plant for a beef plant, so we're pleased that they didn't buy it. It would be worse than ever. But in saying that, that carried on for about 12 months, and as a result of the share market crash in China, some of those partners in that business were affected by it and had to pull out of it. And from what I understand is that new partners were sought and that had been arranged, and this money was supposed to come through and prop up the business.
So people were suspended last Tuesday. Have they been paid? Are people being paid? Is it?
Well, they would have had. I'm not sure whether they've been paid this week or not, but they'd all been paid up until the previous pay week. I understand suppliers and that have been paid up until at least Christmas time anyway.
Right, and there's 130 workers. So these are jobs you desperately want to keep, don't you?
Yeah, well, they're not high-paid jobs as it was, and I dare say most of those people will be just living week by week, and they haven't got a pay packet this week. Well, all those families are going to be in desperate need.
Thanks, Gary. Gary Davis, who is the Otago Southland Union Secretary. Now, we went to the company for comment today because clearly a lot of the discussion is around their financial situation, and they wouldn't comment. It's 6:15. It's only 10 days, unbelievably, until the 2016 Super Rugby season kicks off, with the Blues hosting the Highlanders at Eden Park on Friday week. Could be a cracker of a game. The competition will be tough this year with the addition of 3 new teams. Japan's Sunwolves, first time Japan's been in the competition. Argentina's Jaguars, first time they've been in the competition. And South Africa's Southern Kings. Today marked the official launch. Our sports reporter Matt Chatterton caught up with a couple of players from the New Zealand franchises to get their thoughts on the upcoming season. First up, All Black Nehi Milner-Skudder, who's back for another season with last year's runners-up, the Hurricanes. He says the final loss was a tough end to the season.
Obviously a tough pill to swallow. For myself, I was pretty lucky that I went straight into the All Blacks campaign straight after that, so I had to kind of brush it away pretty quickly. But no, I think the boys took a lot of learnings out of that final last year, and just to be in like a high-pressure situation like that, it'll hold the boys that did play last year that are back again this year in good stead, and they'll definitely be able to kind of learn from that and know how to deal with those situations this year.
Expectations for this season, what sort of do you hope to get out of this year personally and for the team itself?
Obviously thinking back to last year and being in the final, kind of coming one step short, would be nice to really push to get a championship, but there's a lot of hard work before that happens, and so I'm just taking it 1 week at a time, just trying to get better. To have the chance to put on the black jersey again would be just a massive honour. So there's a lot of work to be done in the meantime, and that's what I'm focusing on, is just getting better each day.
Nehi Milner-Skudder from the Canes, of course, talking to Matt Chatterton. There's been a lot of talk in the lead up to the season about the Blues. 14th out of 15 they finished last season. Sir John Kerwin went as head coach, of course, replaced by former All Black captain Tana Umanga. With 2 pre-season wins against the Rebels from Melbourne and the Hurricanes, it appears the 2 times champions, we well now, since that was the case, may be on the right track. A senior prop for the Blues, real team leader Charlie Faumuina, told Matt Chatterton they'll be looking for a playoff spot this year, as they do every season.
That's the expectation every year, but obviously it comes down to the results, But this year, it's a bit of a fresh start, new coach, new facilities. We're expecting the best, and come round 1 against the Highlanders, hopefully we can carry our pre-season form right throughout, and we'll see how we go.
And Tana, how have you found working under his leadership?
Yeah, he's a real detailed guy. Like I was saying before to other guys, he speaks, what he speaks a lot, and you have to deliver, or else you get a bit of an earful. But hey, it's good. It's good for the young fellas to see, and just shows them what Super Rugby is about.
That discipline, I suppose, that Tana brings, is that something that you see in the All Blacks camp, or is he even tougher than the All Blacks boys?
Oh man, I think he's just as tough as old Steve Hansen. Obviously, if everything's going well, he's a good guy to know. But when things kind of go pear-shaped a little bit, you probably want to stay out of his way. So, I think if we keep playing the way he wants us to play, he'll be happy.
Charlie Whamoina talking to our sports reporter, Matt Chatterton. Well, watch is 11.5 minutes away. John Greaves bringing you tonight the British Airline Pilots Association calling for lasers to be classified as offensive weapons after a pilot was forced to return his plane to Heathrow. And jewellery once belonging to the Philippines' former First Lady Imelda Marcos, goodness gracious, worth more than $21 million is going up for auction. All that and more with John at 6:30. Sometimes stories of enormous significance don't capture the public imagination until an image puts them there. American public opinion about the Vietnam War, for example, was changed by a small number of now famous photos. And the Syrian crisis and the plight of tens of thousands of refugees was imprinted finally on widespread consciousness by that heartbreaking photo of a little boy drowned and face down on a Turkish beach. But so many more lives have been lost unnoticed. And nestled in an olive grove on the Greek island of Lesbos, a cemetery with unmarked graves is the final resting place for over 200 unknown people who drowned in the Mediterranean trying to reach a new life in Europe. Mana Rabi from Reuters explains.
The marble plaques in this makeshift cemetery on the Greek island of Lesbos mark the graves of unknown refugees and migrants. Many of those buried here were from the Middle East, all of them drowned in the Mediterranean trying to get to Europe's shores. Their headstones bear no names, mute reminders of the human toll of the migrant crisis. Mustafa Dawa came to Greece from Egypt nearly a decade ago. He's taken on the unofficial role of washing, shrouding, and burying Lesbos' unknown dead.
I can't stop the war there, and I can't make them cross legally. Since I can do nothing about that, I'm doing the only thing that's left for me to do: bury them.
Locals say entire families are buried here. Who they were is anyone's guess. Their ages on the headstones are approximate, their date of death not always accurate. Unknown man, aged 35, number 221. Unknown boy, aged 7, number 40. The local coroner keeps an archive of DNA samples, just in case relatives come forward.
I hope they trace them through DNA, so these people can rest, so that their souls can finally rest in peace, so the mother or father searching for this person can also find peace.
Migration experts say over 3,700 people drowned or went missing crossing the Mediterranean in just 2015, and the actual number is thought to be higher. Here, nestled in an olive grove, over 200 of those victims are laid to rest. Their identities unclear, but their memory not forgotten.
What a lovely story from Reuters. 21 minutes past 6. Wellington's Owhiro Bay icon and natural historian Sheila Natush just turned 90 on Valentine's Day. The Invercargill-born writer and illustrator has over 30 publications to her name and counted literary treasure Janet Frame. Janet Frame is a personal friend. Sheila and her late husband Gilbert lived by the sea in the same cottage for almost 70 years. A regular sight for locals, Sheila could be seen swimming and running along the beach or taking her little rubber dinghy out into the bay every day for decades. In fact, Sheila's such a legend on the south coast that filmmaker Hugh MacDonald has made a documentary about the sprightly woman titled No Ordinary Sheila. Brilliant. But Sheila can't take her little dinghy out onto the water anymore because she has terminal liver cancer. To celebrate her 90th, the Wellington Police Maritime Union took her out for one last special boat trip. And our features reporter Linda Chanway-Earl and camera person Jess Charlton went with her.
So welcome aboard. This is Lady Elizabeth. This is Lady Elizabeth IV. So this is our fourth boat. It's called Lady Elizabeth.
An illustration from The Listener 1967 shows prolifically published natural historian Sheila Natush in her little dinghy sailing about Owhiro Bay. She had converted her craft by making a rudder out of an old biscuit tin lid, a mast out of a mop handle and a sail out of a sheet. Sheila's just turned 90 on Valentine's Day, not as sprightly as usual with liver cancer, but she's keen for one last boat trip, this time aboard the Wellington Maritime Unit's police launch, the Lady Elizabeth IV, for a grand tour of the capital's harbour with Senior Sergeant David Houston.
Have you seen this boat around the south coast at Owhiro Bay? And I understand it's your birthday soon.
14th of Feb, Valentine's Day.
And how old will you be? 90. Woo! Sheepers, that's not a bad thing. Sounds pretty good. 90. Hope you're having a big birthday party. Doing a fishery stop, make sure people are not taking too much fish from the sea.
Right.
So we've got police cars on the shore talking to them on there, and we've just deployed our little boat, and our staff are going to check to make sure they're all good. Do you see any poachers around the south coast? People taking too much seafood?
I remember seeing great bags full of power, so somebody must have been digging into forbidden food.
That's not nice, because it ruins it for the rest of the people, doesn't it? People should just take their share and that's it.
Yes, if I could go out in my wee boat and just get enough for breakfast, I wasn't making a dent on the environment. Yes, just enough, you know, just say a couple for breakfast and dinner.
Would you have a wetsuit? Ooh, cold round there, wouldn't it?
I would.
I reckon it's the coldest part of the country is on the south coast.
I should say Bluff would be cold.
Oh, you're pretty brave to get in the water without a wetsuit on.
Yeah.
We've just come alongside now, Sheila. So you can apply for the police now and get on board here and be a crew person.
Would you take me on?
Oh, yeah, well, you'd have to go for a series of exercises.
Sheila was born and raised on Stewart Island and passionate about the wild. So she and late husband Gilbert moved into one of the oldest cottages on the rugged south coast over 60 years ago. Up in her cable car overlooking Awhiro Bay with its vista of the Cook Strait and Kaikoura Ranges, Sheila describes the best moments of her life.
Getting married to my late husband Gilbert. So I've had lots of good moments, but yes, that of course was special.
What's the secret to long life?
Good luck.
And lots of exercise and living frugally and...
yes, lots of exercise and, you know, going out in boats, climbing in scrambling about in the tararoos, all those vigorous sort of things. Yes. Another gorgeous day. It's been an absolutely fabulous day out on the water on the Lady Liz 4. Aren't they nice people? They're so kind and courteous, helpful and efficient, of course, at their job.
It's been a good birthday present.
Oh, thank you so very much for arranging all this.
What a lovely story. Thank you, Sheila, and thank you, Linda Chanway Earl. About 150 people gathered on a hill in Porirua this morning to watch the demolition of an historic RNZ radio mast. At 220 metres, the mast in Titahi Bay was New Zealand's second tallest structure, with only Auckland's Sky Tower standing higher. It was deemed unsafe because of excessive rust and was demolished using explosives this morning. But some residents say they will miss seeing it out of their windows. Teresa Cowie was there.
Ted Gallens lived in Titahi Bay for 50 years. He brought his grandson Brodie along to see the demolition and for a bit of a lesson in local history.
Yeah, see a landmark come down is special. It's always been there, but also as part of Titahi Bay is also part of an infrastructure of people and buildings, and they weren't far away from us.
Charlie Hassey grew up in Titahi Bay, and as a 5-year-old in 1937, he watched workmen build the original mast on the site. In the 70s, he also watched its replacement being built, and today that mast, which has shone a twinkling light in the night sky as it transmitted radio nationwide, came down.
I saw the original one being bought out by a truck and trailer in several parts over a long time actually, and my father was worked on relief in putting the road up for it to come.
RNZ's head of technology, Matthew Finn, oversaw the demolition and says the mast is of great significance to the area.
There's been a tower there, its predecessor in this one, since 1936. So the people of Tatahi Bay and Porirua have looked out to their northern views over 80 years and seen this thing dominating the skyline. So I guess you'd have to be about 90 years old to know what it's like to look to the north here and not have a huge transmission tower in view.
A smaller mast that already stands on the site will continue to transmit radio across the country. In Wellington for Checkpoint, Teresa Cowie.
Lots of feedback coming in tonight. A couple of things really got you going. The Mangere situation. If a policewoman tells you to get into your house because it's dangerous, take your children inside. If a policewoman loads her gun, then it's serious. Do what you are told by the police. Another person says, what sort of morons allow their kids to hang around a police situation? Irresponsible parents who are teaching the next generation that violence is acceptable. Not a lot of sympathy for the version of the residents of that street in Mangere. Read the quakes. Good evening. The delay in settling earthquakes for some may be because that land should not have been built on in the first place. Council's fault. There is an awful lot of land remediation that is required in some areas. That liquefaction, low-lying. And there was a sense at the time that planning was signed off on that the land couldn't sustain the kind of housing that was being put there, but of course it happened. Read the Children's Commissioner, polarised opinions here. It's time Russell Wills held parents accountable rather than the state and landlords. Parents are responsible for child raising. Wills has evaded the hard calls on parenting to suit sympathetic ears like yours. He won't be missed, says one person, but another says, hi John, excellent wise words from the Children's Commissioner. If only the government would listen. I'm not holding my breath. Thank you for your feedback. Thank you for listening. We'll be back tomorrow night at 5 o'clock. Now, it's time for World Watch with John Greaves.
Welcome to World Watch PM. I'm John Greaves. Tonight, strong criticism of Russia over the latest bombings in Syria. A critical time for members of the European Union. And a new cancer test that could save thousands of lives. Those stories and more in World Watch PM. Airstrikes have destroyed 5 hospitals and 2 schools in northern Syria, and the United Nations says more than 50 people have been killed, calling the attacks a blatant violation of international law. The medical charity Médecins Sans Frontières says one hospital in Makhlet al-Numan was destroyed by 4 missiles fired a few minutes apart. In the town of Azaz, missiles struck a children's